Right, hi everyone. I'm Greg. I'm the community lead for Plastic Free Chesterfield, and it's really great to see everyone come on this call today. This is the second webinar of the year from Plastic Free Chesterfield. Last month we had a really good session talking about all the things all the confusions around compostable plastics. And if you've missed that one, you can check that out on our Plastic Free Chesterfield YouTube channel. So head to YouTube and search Plastic Free Chesterfield. There's a lot of kind of general confusions around compostables and biodegradable plastics. So that was a really good one. So, but we're really delighted to be joined by Marine Conservation Society tonight. So for that. But before I introduce Tara, just thought I'd say that, yeah, if everyone can make sure they're on mute throughout this, that'd be really great. And then, yeah, so just to let you know about Plastic Free Chesterfield, we're one of 700 plastic free groups all over the country. And there's going to, so there's just more every week that join and become sort of sign up their plastic free communities. And we're working with the community to reduce single-use plastic together in our communities. So in Chesterfield, we're doing really well. When we're next month, we're going to be an accredited plastic-free community, which is going to be really exciting, which means that we'll have passed 5 objectives in our community to be able to become awarded as a plastic-free community, which is really exciting. So lots more to come next month on that, and next month as well, we're going to be joined by City to Sea, who are a really great organisation who've been campaigning on the issue of single-use plastics for quite a few years as well. That's going to be a special one for us next month. This is International Earth Day on the 22nd of April. So, and that'll be a celebration for us as well, with us being accredited. So look, all that to come really. But yeah, if you want to find out more, you can head to the Plastic Free Chesterfield website. We can find out all that we're doing and we're working on, and follow us on social media as well. So yeah, so I'm going to introduce Tara now. So Tara is the Marine Conservation Society's volunteer and community engagement manager, and she's really passionate about protecting our seas and marine life. She previously worked for RSPB, and she's kind of done some work for the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation, which is really cool. Lots of really great experience and lots of good knowledge and to bring to this. And this webinar is going to be all about talking about our hidden plastic fibres in our clothes, and so we'll find out all more about this from Tara. So thank you very much, Tara, and thank you so much for coming. It's really great to have you here. So thanks for joining.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks to Greg for inviting me, and also to all of you for coming along. I'm just going to share my screen. Cool. So I can only see a very few of you now. So if there are any problems with the screen sharing at any point, you might have to shout to let me know. Just going to move this. There we go. Okay. So yeah, my job is in Scotland. I cover the whole of Scotland in my job. So obviously this is a wee bit out of my patch, but I've just been looking at your kind of Facebook page and stuff and talking to Greg, and it's really great to hear about everything you're doing with Plastic Free Chesterfield and all of the other kind of plastic free groups who are on this call. So yeah, amazing work tackling plastic pollution, and obviously really relevant to everything I'm talking about now. For anyone who's not familiar with us as a charity, the Marine Conservation Society, we are the UK's leading kind of marine charity, looking after, of course, protecting the seas around the UK and the wildlife in those seas. We also work internationally in the Caribbean, so the UK overseas territories there. I'm not going to read this mission statement out, but I'm sure if you want to, you can have a wee read of it. And I'd just like to show you this. This is our vision. So we're all about working with individuals like yourselves, working with in communities, volunteers, passionate people, and kind of helping to connect people together into networks who can, together we can drive policy change, because really, as I'm sure you are all aware, Individuals can make an impact, but communities can make a bigger impact. And it's through kind of political change that really we can see these shifts that we need to really tackle these huge problems like plastic pollution. I absolutely love this photo. This photo is actually taken snorkeling off the Isle of Arran, so a bit further from where you are, but a lot of people who maybe don't know so much about marine life might think that a colourful photo like this, showing reefs and colourful fish and things, might be taken somewhere tropical. But in fact, we have just the most incredible diversity of marine life right here in the UK, and a lot of people overlook that. Just very briefly, my job. So I'm the Volunteer and Community Engagement Manager for MCS in Scotland. So my job normally in non-COVID times means I work with communities and volunteers a lot. So I work a lot on beaches, which is lovely, doing biology surveys, also picking up litter, surveying litter. I kind of help to help communities to work together. I also do a lot of work supporting my policy colleagues. So in the bottom left photo there, I'm with an MP and an MSP. I also get into Scottish Parliament quite a bit with my policy colleagues, so really supporting our campaigning work. And a lot of the work we do is in partnership. We briefly talked about this kind of whilst people were joining. But we're a relatively small charity, especially in Scotland, which is where I work. There's only 3 of us. So it's myself and 2 policy colleagues. So pretty much everything we do is in partnership with organisations like Surfers Against Sewage, Keep Scotland Tidy, Keep Scotland Beautiful, and those various different groups you've been talking about. So we do, everything is collaborative. It's just maybe not always publicly obvious. But we believe in collaboration. I think really in conservation, it's the only way we can have a meaningful impact. We need to work together, especially when we're all trying to achieve the same things. And the bottom right photo there, I also work a lot in schools. We really believe in working with children, helping to what we call increase ocean literacy. So helping children to understand how important our oceans are and some of the issues we're going to talk about on this call. One of the things I find really interesting about my job is I often think children are a bit more aware of some of these issues like plastic pollution than adults necessarily are. I think children are really switched on. They have been watching programs like Blue Planet for what feels like their whole lives, whereas for a lot of us, we came to these issues a bit later. So children are really, they have an inherent understanding of what sustainability is, whereas not all adults get it. Whereas I'm guessing that everyone on this call is really switched on because you've chosen to be part of these plastic-free communities, which is really exciting. So the work of our charity is focused in 3 main areas. I'm just going to very briefly kind of introduce you to what we broadly do, and then I'll focus in on this subject of microfibres. So our work is, we look at ocean recovery. So that's everything to do with understanding the wildlife that's in our seas, so quite a lot of science work. As a charity, we employ quite a lot of scientists. I'm a biologist by training. So my real specialism, my interest is animals and plants. Obviously, absolutely love the marine environment. And our ocean recovery work is all about using that science as well to influence policy. So this is about protecting species and habitats. The big chunk of work that this talk is going to focus on is clean seas. So this is pollution. I'm really going to focus mainly on microfibres in this talk, but of course we do work on all kinds of different marine pollution. So that includes bigger plastic pollutants, things that are visible, but also invisible pollutants. So we hear quite a lot, or we probably don't hear enough in the news, but we're hearing a bit about invisible pollutants in the water, like PFAS, things like these chemical terms that maybe we're less familiar with, although as a group you guys might be more familiar. We really are trying to tackle these different pollutants as well. And we also do work on responsible seafood, so helping people, if they do eat seafood, to make sustainable choices. But focusing on clean seas. So this photo, I selected it because it's quite a kind of shocking insight into, if any of you have done a beach clean, which I'm guessing quite a lot of you have, or it doesn't have to be a beach clean, any kind of litter pick in your community. You'll know that the litter, once you start picking up, you tend to, it maybe isn't all the big obvious stuff. You can find lots of small pieces of plastic. In this photo, there's an awful lot of cigarette butts. We find a lot of cigarette butts. Cigarette butts are one of the sort of highest and most frequent plastic items that are found in the marine environment. And quite a good example of a type of litter that people often mistake for being a different material, but so often these litter items are made of plastic. So I think the event that Greg actually mentioned earlier is the Great British Beach Clean. So this is our kind of flagship event. We do this every year where we invite people, whilst, you know, by all means, we think we should beach clean. We support people to beach clean all year round, and it's always a valuable thing to do. What we would really encourage folk to do is get involved in this particular event. So it takes place over a bit more than a week during September every year. The Great British Beach Clean, it's a little bit different from a regular beach clean. So you pick up the litter, but you also write down what you find. So this litter survey, I'll explain what I mean by that. And the reason we do the survey is really because, as you all know, the trouble is that plastic, especially plastic, there are obviously different types of material, but most of the litter we find on beaches is plastic, just keeps coming back. I have gone back to the same beach 1 week after we have left it spotless and found it just covered in litter again, because every single tide brings in waves of more litter. So ultimately, we are fighting an uphill battle if we continue to just pick up the litter once it ends up in the ocean. And in fact, what we want to be able to do is by asking people to collect the data to actually quantify what marine litter there is, what people are finding on beaches. That gives us evidence, and that's the evidence that we can use when we lobby government. And that can be at a local level, a national level, a UK level, and even a European or a global level. The data that volunteers are collecting are the data that our politicians are listening to. They're the data that they make their decisions based upon when they're changing laws to reduce the amount of plastic going into the sea. And the reason those data are so important is because we have 27 years of data now collected in the same way for 27 years. And it's not just us in the UK. We're using the same methodologies as being used to collect litter data globally, which I think is really exciting every year. When I take part and do beach cleans through the Great British Beach Clean, just knowing that there are other people collecting litter and collecting the data in the same way all around the world at the same time is really exciting. It's very empowering. So the sense of community that you have in your plastic-free groups can extend globally during that particular event. So that's why it's September, and that's why we advocate these methods. So yeah, that's why I put that date on there as well. So if you possibly can, hopefully by that time, lockdown will be lifted maybe, life will be normal again. And if you're able to get to the Greek beach, it's a great social activity and a really good way to to give back and to help to protect the environment. And it is still possible with social distancing. So this is me and my colleague Catherine during the 2020 Great British Beach Clean. Normally when we do beach cleans, we would have quite a kind of buzz. We'd have tens, if not hundreds of people on beaches, especially really busy, polluted beaches. But in this case, because of lockdown restrictions, it was just the two of us. And it turns out that litter pickers are quite effective at adding, making sure you've got 2 meters apart. So we just took a lot longer to collect the litter than we normally would. But we did, of course, make sure we got all of that data. This is the method. It's very simple. Basically, it's just 100 meters of the beach. You can use whatever you like to mark out the 100 meters. You don't even need a tape measure. You can just pace it out if you want to. And we just collect all the litter and write down what we find from that 100 meters to the back of the beach. If anyone thinks that this is something you might want to do, then we can help you. So we've got a really great support sort of team, our head office, who can help with any questions you have. We even have some free litter picking kits available at the moment to people who are able to take part in this. So we can help you. And I know obviously Surfers Against Sewage are doing the same sorts of things. So this is the survey form. It looks a bit daunting initially, but it's actually very simple. It's all organised by different material types. The big column on the left is plastic. So most items of litter are made of plastic. And we would really encourage people to take part. If you only do one of these once a year, it's making a big difference. And yeah, I just mentioned as well, if you do take part in our beach cleans, obviously we've got lots of advice about how to do that safely as well. I've mentioned COVID briefly, but even in normal times, obviously there's lots of safety considerations, and we've got risk assessments and stuff that you can just download. So yeah, just get in touch if you have any questions. And as I mentioned, the thing that makes this really powerful as a data set and really gives us clout when we're talking to government and things is is the fact that this is a global initiative. So it's something called the International Coastal Cleanup, and my mugshot is right in the middle of that because they did their report and they used our little Scottish beach clean as part of it. But it was just exciting to think that there were people doing beach cleans everywhere around the world, and this is just growing. I think what's exciting that I see in my job is that your community, obviously we know that there are communities all around England, all around the UK, but also I see communities all around the world doing the same, and that's exciting because it's happened relatively recently. Okay, so I mentioned why we collect the data, but this is what we do. We obviously use the litter data when we are then working with government. Governments aren't going to make decisions to change laws unless there's a good evidence base to do so. And so the evidence is provided by the data volunteers collect. So this is our CEO, Sandy, on the left there. I'm sure you recognize the chap on the right. And they are talking about, as you can see, Stop the Plastic Tide, our kind of big campaign about reducing single-use plastics ending up in the ocean. And these are just some of the examples of some campaign wins that have been achieved through partnership working and a long time of campaigning. It's very difficult to influence policy change. It takes a long time. But the things like the 5p carrier charge is one of the oldest kind of legislative changes that have resulted in a real difference. The good thing about our litter data, as well as the fact that they highlight problems like the sorts of litter we find on beaches, they also highlight where the solutions are working. So we can then say to governments, well, because of that 5p carrier charge, we don't see as many plastic bags on beaches now. So that's a win because we know that things like turtles were eating them previously. We also were involved in this ban on microbeads. And we've got, in Scotland at least, we've got the ban on plastic cotton bud sticks because we find a lot of those on beaches. People are flushing them down the toilet. We've also we worked with industry to bring about this fine to flush, a kind of certification to mean that it's very easy, a standard for people to look for if you buy things like wet wipes, flushable wet wipes, that people were flushing down the toilet without realizing they're just made of plastic. So now we ask people to only do so if it's got that logo on it. And more recently in Scotland, we've got a deposit return scheme. So this is all about trying to reduce the amount of bottles and things on beaches. All really positive steps. And in some respects, I think Scotland's really leading the way, which is quite exciting. One of the reasons why I really enjoy working here. And obviously when we can demonstrate to the governments in the other countries that Scotland's leading the way, a little bit of healthy competitiveness can help to kind of encourage the other countries to get on board as well. And so in England, we're really kind of in the final push towards having a deposit return scheme there as well. So fingers crossed this year we'll see that commitment. Okay, so just looking at the Great British Beach Clean results for 2020. So bearing in mind, we were still in some degree of lockdown at the time. We were really thrilled that more than 2,000 volunteers still took part in our beach cleans and litter surveys. I mean, I cannot express the gratitude to volunteers enough because really we could not achieve half of what we do without volunteers. And this is what we found. So this is what volunteers were finding through their beach cleans. So these are the kind of top 5 litter items that are found on beaches every single year. It doesn't change that much, the exact numbers change, but the top 5 offenders tend to be similar. And just to highlight, if you look through these top 5 items, they're actually all made of plastic. So with the exception that some wet wipes are now made of alternative materials, but still pretty much mostly plastic. And also some string might be made of natural fibres, but mostly we're talking about plastic string. So actually, a huge proportion of the litter that we're finding on beaches is plastic. But just to highlight this one, so unsurprisingly to any of you who've done a litter pick, the worst offender in terms of the most frequent type of litter that we find on beaches are pieces of plastic and polystyrene. And I think it's pretty shocking when you consider this is an average across the whole of the UK and all of the beaches that we clean, some of which, are way out in remote parts of Scotland where there's hardly any litter. So the average is 167 items of pieces of plastic or polystyrene for every 100 metres of beach. It's a huge volume of litter. And I mentioned cigarette stubs earlier, and you can see that's still quite a high proportion as well. So just focusing in on this, because this is quite a good example. So no doubt in this group, you might well be aware of this, but anyone who isn't, this is probably the most important message I can really kind of convey to you. And I really think a lot of people misunderstand about plastic. We talk about plastic disappearing, but it actually never disappears. Plastic lasts forever. At the moment, there might be some clever innovations that can maybe enzymes that can digest plastic, but for the time being, those are in the future. We don't have that solution. So for the time being, all plastic that's on the planet today exists because no plastic's ever disappeared yet. And all the plastic that's going into the sea right now and during our call this evening will remain forever. And I think that's terrifying. And this is because plastic breaks up over time. So it fragments into smaller pieces that are called microplastics. And I chose that graphic with the bottle just to kind of highlight this point. So in fact, it's just an inevitability. Plastic as a material, once it's in the sea and exposed to oxygen and UV rays, it will just fragment. And plastic scientists estimate that it's going to take about 1,000 years for something like a plastic bottle to fragment into microplastics. And once it's microplastics, those microplastics persist forever. So it's a pretty scary fact. And just to highlight what I'm talking about here, so a lot of the litter that you can see, this was on a beach clean that I did last September during our Great British Beach Clean. There were just lots of these fragments, colourful fragments of plastics. And really, these particular plastics are on their way to becoming something we call secondary microplastics. So this is quite important, just sort of distinction, because I'll mention it a few times. So microplastics can be split into two types, primary and secondary. Secondary ones are just like this. They're the ones that have the result of larger plastic items breaking, fragmenting into smaller pieces. Now, this might sound like it's maybe not important, but it is. Okay. So when we do our beach cleans or litter picks in your community or whatever, we tend to really only be able to pick up large, visible pieces of plastic. In fact, when we can talk about microplastics are actually pieces of plastic that are 0.5 centimetre across or smaller, so really quite small. So you've got to have pretty good eyesight to be collecting litter that's that small. So whilst it is amazing that our volunteers collected more than 3 tons of plastic from beaches, and that is definitely making a positive impact, like I think that anyone who's going out there and picking up litter should just really kind of feel a real sense of achievement for what they're doing, because remember, if you didn't pick that litter up, it would still be there in the environment indefinitely. So it's always a good thing. But it's quite scary when you consider that actually we were missing a lot of plastic. You look at those 3 tons and it's only the big visible stuff. What about all of those microplastics that we didn't see, that we kind of left behind? So just to kind of scale this up onto a kind of global scale, put it into context. So it's estimated that 12.2 million tons of plastic enter the ocean globally every year. And to make that a bit more of a real statistic, you might have heard this already, but that's equivalent to dumping a rubbish truck, a truck absolutely full of litter, into the ocean every minute of every day. And I think that's terrifying. And again, that's still quite abstract. It's quite hard to really understand that number. So we worked with Sky Ocean Rescue a few years ago, and you can see this amazing sculpture. I don't know if any of you saw it in person. It travelled all around the UK, came up to Scotland, and this sculpture of a whale actually is made to, it represents the size, the volume of plastic that enters the sea every minute. And it was just quite shocking to see it. And what was fascinating was like talking to people as they walked past and kind of said, what's that about? A lot of folk just hadn't realised the scale of the problem until they had it right in front of them like that. So, and just again, this is another shocking photo, I'm afraid, but you're probably all on this group well aware of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, this huge like floating soup of litter in the North Pacific Ocean. So it's about 3 times the size of France. It's caused by these ocean gyres, or these like huge swirling ocean currents that basically cause all of these floating marine litter to kind of gather together. Now, this is another example where unfortunately the visible plastic pollution is really only the tip of the iceberg. And that's because oceanographers actually calculate that about 70% of marine litter sinks down. It's either floating in the water column or it's made it all the way down to the sea floor. So I think that's, again, pretty terrifying. What you also can't see in this photo is that a lot of the litter floating in the ocean on the surface are microplastics. So what do microplastics look like? So this is a microscopic view of microplastics. The scale there is 1,000 micrometers or 1 millimeter. So you can see this is very, very tiny, probably smaller than we could see with our eyes. And just to highlight, that wee bit of blue plastic is a secondary microplastic. So you can see it's got quite frayed edges. So just like I was saying, this is a piece of plastic that's broken up, it's fragmented from a bigger piece of plastic. So now on to primary microplastics. So when we talk about these, remember this is anything smaller or equal to ½ a centimeter across. Maybe you're thinking about things like micro beads. So that's what you can see in the picture here. Quite a few years ago now, there was a lot in the news about this because we finally, after many, many years of campaigning, had this campaign success. So micro beads in cosmetics like face scrubs and things were banned, which was a huge win. This is still, you know, the UK is still, it's not, you know, we're still a good example of legislation in this respect. Not all countries have followed suit. So microbeads are still being released into the sea elsewhere. And another type of primary microplastic that you might be familiar with are these things, nurdles. They're also called mermaid's tears, maybe you know that name, and what they are is pre-production plastic pellets. So that basically means anything that we have, and wherever you are, wherever you are in your house, probably there's going to be plastic things around you, maybe the laptop you're looking at or whatever. Everything we have that's made of plastic will have started out as nurdles that have been melted and molded into different shapes. So we shouldn't be finding these on beaches at all, because these things, they're plastics that have never even become anything. They've just been spilt accidentally along their route to becoming melted and molded into things. But we do find these nurdles on beaches as well, and they've been found in a huge number of countries around the world. As a really small kind of community action that I would encourage you to take part, if you can, if you're able to do the Great Nurdle Hunt. You can do this at any time of the year, whenever we're allowed to get to the beach again. If you see nurdles, you can see what they look like in that picture. They're often quite colourful, but they can be all kinds of different colours. You basically just tell the Great Nurdle Hunt and they can add it to their map. They're really just sort of kind of gather the evidence so that we can hopefully stop so many of these nurdles entering the marine environment. Okay, so this looks a wee bit complicated, but I'm going to break it down. So remember that I said that the total amount of plastic entering the ocean every year is 12.2 million tonnes. Well, 1.5 million tonnes of that are microplastics, okay, primary microplastics. So they're the ones that were made as tiny plastics that have entered the sea in that state. And the nurdles I mentioned, well, it's actually very hard to see on this slide because it's such a small wedge of the pie. Nurdles are actually only 0.3% of the microplastics found in the ocean. And microbeads, that's where the sort of shower symbol is, they're only 2% of the primary microplastics in the ocean. And this is why we're really focusing on this area. So a shocking 35% of primary microplastics in the ocean are from synthetic textiles. So the kind of clothes we're wearing potentially. So I'll go into more detail about this. A huge proportion. I was shocked when I started kind of really digging into this. And in fact, when you look at deep sea sediments, so, you know, maybe cast your mind back to watching like a nature documentary where they've got some of those amazing submarines and they go down into the deep where it's incredibly dark and the wildlife down there is just mind-blowingly alien, you know, really different to what we can imagine. In those sediments, they have found microplastics, and depending on where they're looking, between 70 and 100% of all of those microplastics in those deep sea sediments are microfibres. So you can really see that microfibres seem to be a massive proportion of the problem. So going back to this picture again, I highlighted before the blue fragment of plastic. But actually, when scientists are looking at samples of seawater or sand from beaches under a microscope, what they're finding is that a really large proportion of the microplastics they're finding are microfibres. So I've just kind of circled one there for you to see. So that's an example of a microplastic. And in fact, you can see now, looking at that slide, quite a lot of what you're looking at are microfibres. So where are they coming from? So some of you are probably well aware of this, but if you look at the label of any kind of clothing you're wearing, and you'll be able to see what material your clothing is made out of. And it can be quite interesting. I thought the jumper I was wearing was a natural material, but it's got some acrylic in there. Quite a lot of the clothing that we wear is a blend of different fibres, sometimes natural with synthetic fibres. So if your clothing label says something like polyester or nylon or acrylic, then these are all, obviously, these are synthetic plastic fibres. And as we wear our clothes, as we wash our clothes, they are shedding these fibres all of the time. So think of if you wear like a white t-shirt and then over the top of it, you maybe chuck a fleece over the top. Well, after a day of wearing it, your white t-shirt might well have a kind of fine pale blue fluff or something on it. You kind of notice this on your clothes sometimes. Well, that sort of fluff, they're microfibres that are shedding constantly from our clothing. We just don't always see it. Okay, so I'd like to just introduce you to this scientist. So Dr. Imogen Napper, she's a scientist from the University of Plymouth, and we work quite closely with her. She's one of our sea champions. Imogen has done some fantastic research in this area, and her research is all focused on marine plastic pollution. So during her PhD, Imogen was looking at microfibres specifically. And the research was all focused on understanding how washing our clothes is contributing to microfibres going into the marine environment. And this is what she found, pretty shocking statistic. So Imogen found that a single clothes wash can release over 700,000 microfibres in the wastewater. And many of these white microfibres then end up in the ocean. So I think that's quite a kind of sobering thought. But really the question remains, like, how do these fibres end up in the ocean? We know that when you do a clothes wash and the wastewater leaves our houses, along with the water from our sinks and from our toilets, they go through wastewater treatment plants. So this is what those water treatment plants could look like. And so what's happening to these microfibres when they leave our houses? And why aren't these wastewater treatment plants solving the problem? So there's a few things. Okay, this is a slightly complicated graphic, so I'm sorry about that, but I'm just going to break it down and focus in particular areas. So this is looking at the routes for different types of fibres and plastics entering the marine, microfibres entering the marine environment globally. So I'm just going to focus on Europe. So on the left, you've got all of the different areas of the world, but just looking at Europe, firstly, I'm going to look at this area. So treated wastewater, and don't worry if it's too small to read, it doesn't matter. This is basically the wastewater treatment works. They're very, very efficient at removing, filtering out all of the microplastics and macroplastics, so any plastics in the water from our houses in the waste. In fact, they're able to remove between 80 and 99% of all of those fibres and other microplastics, which is really good. It's very efficient. But the problem is that this still means that an estimated 65 million microplastic particles are actually being discharged every day in the effluent from every single waste treatment plant. So despite the fact they're catching the vast majority, because there's just so many of these microfibres, that's still quite a lot of them being released in the water. So that's one route. The second route is possibly something you're not familiar with. It'll be interesting to see. So the treatment water was a relatively small proportion of Europe's contribution to this problem. Here's the bigger proportion. So WWTP, that means wastewater treatment plant. So despite being captured in the process of treating the water, the majority of microplastics are actually still ending up in the environment. And that sounds quite weird, right? But the reason it's happening is because solid materials, including microfibres, are actually being captured and remain within what's called the treated sewage sludge. It's as lovely as it sounds, and I hope no one's eaten their dinner. I don't want to put anyone off. But in the UK, the majority of sludge, that's about 87%, is then actually applied back to agricultural land as a fertiliser. So you can kind of see what's happening here. Along with that fertiliser, you've got all of these microfibres, and over time, these microfibres and other microplastics are being added again and again to our agricultural land. So over time as well, they can then get washed off in rainwater and runoff and streams and end up back in the ocean. So actually, whilst these treatment works are really, really effective at removing these plastics during the process, unfortunately, they're still going back into the environment in the large majority. Okay, so in this wee video, what you can see, so obviously once these fibres have made their way into the marine environment, they are going to have a big impact on marine life. So these are plankton. So plankton is just the word for small marine animals. Unfortunately, this poor chap, he's actually eaten a microfibre and it's right inside of its body. It's probably very poorly. It's certainly not moving around very much. So we know that these plankton maybe mistake microplastics and microfibres for food. Perhaps they look like some of their natural food sources. We don't really know why they do it. But I just want to point out, so we're all too familiar, unfortunately, with these fairly horrific stories and photos of big marine creatures who have been damaged by plastic pollution. So there was a story just this week on BBC News about a sperm whale who washed up on a beach on Harris in the Outer Hebrides, and it was found to have had 100 kilos of plastic in its digestive system. Absolutely shocking, possibly not as shocking as it should be, because I think we're almost desensitized by hearing these stories so often. But when we think about, so the impacts of that plastic on that whale were kind of obvious to us, but actually when you look at something like a plankton, the kind of impacts are similar. So there'll be physical impacts, and they can be things like physical blockages in the digestive system. Also, just the fact that they're full of plastic means they feel physically full, so they maybe aren't eating as much as they should. This could impact energy reserves and maybe make them more likely to be unable to defend themselves, for example. And there are also chemical impacts. So there can be chemicals, these could be the chemicals that are actually added to the plastic whilst it's being produced. Things like maybe, if we're talking microfibres, that could be a flame retardant from the fibres from our curtains, for example. Or it could be plastic that's absorbed, pollutants that have been absorbed into the plastic once they're in the marine environment. So we know that when plastic is in the sea, it becomes toxic because it basically attracts the toxins in the water. And in fact, about 690 species have now been recorded as having the impacts of marine plastics, marine debris in the environment. And they're only the ones we've recorded. I suspect the real number is far higher. So in this photo, you can see what happens. So this is a kind of cross-section of an oyster. And you can actually see the microfibre inside of the animal's body. I'll just give you a moment to read those fairly shocking headlines, but this is probably not a surprise to you. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that essentially these microplastics are appearing on our plates. And we've also found that 63% of shrimp in the North Sea contain synthetic fibres. So you might be watching this, listening to this and thinking, what about human health impacts? Well, we, of course, Marine Conservation Society, we are not a human health charity. But what I can tell you is that there's been quite a lot of research into maybe the scale of marine plastics entering the human food chain, and especially for seafood consumers. It's estimated that seafood consumers, especially shellfish, could be eating as many as 55,000 microplastics a year. So that's quite a scary number. And that's per person. And also the World Health Organization has actually called for a reduction in plastic pollution to benefit the environment and reduce human exposure. So whilst we don't necessarily have the evidence yet, it's obviously being taken fairly seriously. Okay, so I think I've probably got across the fact that the scale of this problem is huge and it's scary. The statistic on this slide is actually for the UK alone, so it doesn't take much to scale that up and think about the global situation. And this is the reason why we are campaigning to reduce the flow of microfibres into the ocean. And there is a solution, so that's definitely the good news. So introducing again back to Dr. Imogen Napper's research. So as well as looking at how microfibres are getting into the ocean, Imogen was looking at ways to tackle the problem. So the researcher was actually looking at two different types of filters. So that you can get filters, washing machine filters, I'll focus on these ones first, that you can put, they're actually they're actually kind of external to the washing machine. They essentially fit into the wastewater pipe and catch any fibres that are leaving after your wash. And then the ones on the left are the type that you can buy now commercially, and they can put inside your washing machine drum. And she was looking at how well these different filters were catching the microfibres to stop them from going into the marine environment. And you can see the highest number there, the highest percentage of capture was the X-filtre, so 78%. So a huge proportion were being caught. I'm just going to show you this very short video just to demonstrate how this is working. So this isn't really something that you or I could buy. This is something that needs to be fitted into the washing machine. But what this demonstrates is that it's a very effective way of catching the fibres. So the pink here is just a really easy way to visualize. These are the fibres coloured pink. And this mimics a washing machine cycle that would obviously be releasing fibres from our clothing. And then as it drains out, it's going through this filtered device. And what you'll be able to see very neatly, most of those fibres have actually been caught. So hopefully just open there and you'll be able to see the solids. There we go. So it looks like a big solid because it's all been trapped. So that's awesome because basically it's capturing the vast majority, 78% on average, of all of that microfibres. So we have the evidence that by fitting microfibre filters into washing machines, the flow of microfibres is being reduced. And that is why we're asking folk to sign this petition. So if you could do so, that would be amazing. Because what we really want to do is to see our governments bringing in legislation so that new washing machines are all going to be fitted with these microfibre filters. Because that's the one for which we have the evidence works the best. And we've got we did this YouGov survey and there's a lot of support. People are willing to maybe spend a bit more money when they buy a washing machine because they recognise the importance of this. And in general, folk are very supportive of this change in the law. Just want to very briefly mention before I wrap up, Imogen also looked at these within washing machine kind of drum devices. So these are the sorts of things you can buy right now. And what she found, as you can see, is that the most successful filter to stop our microfibres going into the marine environment was this Guppy Friend wash bag. So it does, as you can see in the picture there, basically you pop all your washing in one of these. Maybe some of you use them already. And the idea is that catches all of the fibres so they don't go into the environment. They retail at about £25 though, so that might be, understandably too expensive for quite a lot of people, which is kind of why we really need these filters to be fitted. Okay, and then just mention that if any of you are connected to businesses who you think might want to get involved and show your support, we can offer advice, and we've got this pledge so businesses can help to reduce their microfibre impact. And here are some tips. So in the meantime, whilst we're waiting for the government to change the law, there are some things that we can all do to help. So firstly, we can check the labels of our clothing. So if you need to buy new clothing, we would really encourage you, if you possibly can, to avoid synthetic fibres. Try and get 100% natural fibres if you possibly can. Remember, the very worst offenders are things like polyester fleece. Unfortunately, they release fibres at the highest rate. We're not advocating reduced hygiene, of course, but we're just saying that perhaps we wash our clothes too frequently. I think sometimes we're all guilty of just, you take an item of clothing off and chuck it in the washing basket, and maybe it could have been worn again, especially for something like a jumper or a fleece. They can be washed quite a few more times. So we are saying if you don't need to, then maybe your clothes just need airing. Washing with a full load actually makes a difference. And this is partly because the way in which, the reason fibres are released is because they get moved around a lot in the drum. So if you've only got a half load, you tend to find more fibres released. Also, if you can, we advocate swapping from washing powder to washing liquid. And this is because powders are really abrasive. So they cause more release of plastic. And also if you could use fabric softener, that will help as well. Washing at cooler temperatures helps because high temperatures cause a higher release because they damage the materials. Tumble drying your clothes less will also help. And like I said, if you really want to, if you're able to spend the money, then a guppy bag, there is research to suggest that helps too. Okay, just the last couple of slides to wrap up. So during our lifetimes, everyone on this call, I'm sure, no matter what age we are, has witnessed this rapid rise of fast fashion. So I'm talking about fashion items that are made of cheap synthetic materials, often, at least. They're not always cheap synthetic materials, but more often than not they are. And that's because those materials are the ones that are most readily available, most cheaply available. And the trend really is to only wear these items a few times. So there's an obvious issue with microfibre shedding. But again, this is a really interesting one, because did you know that fashion actually accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions? So there's a huge climate change aspect to this story as well, when you consider that this is a climate emergency. Also worth mentioning that our clothes actually lose fibres at the fastest rate during their first few washes. So if you think about it, when you first buy an item of clothing, it often feels really lovely and soft, but after you've washed it, it never really feels that soft again. And that's because when they manufacture our clothes are not washed before we buy them. And that's because they know they feel nice and soft. And the reason they feel soft is because if you looked under a microscope, they've got lots of loose fibres on the surface. So that's why it's really great to hold on to your clothes for longer if you possibly can, because later, once you've had these clothes for a wee while, they'll release less fibres. And maybe if you do want new clothes when it's allowed again, maybe buying secondhand, going to charity shops, swapping clothes, that kind of thing. Probably things that you're all very aware of. And that's why there's this rise in the slow fashion movement. And this is possibly an unlikely face for the slow fashion movement, but Deborah Meaden is actually one of our ocean advocates at Marine Conservation Society. She's very motivated to protect the sea. And as you can see from this tweet, Deborah Meaden has said that she will also join the slow fashion movement by not buying any new clothes. I'm sure she has quite a lot of clothes, probably more than most of us. But I think it's a really important point that we could probably all do our bit to use less. Okay, and then just to broaden out again and wrap up, and then I'm very happy to take questions from you. So things I've talked about you doing potentially to help. You could take part in our beach cleans, especially the litter survey, the Great British Beach Clean. Please do sign that petition I talked about, the Stop Ocean Threads petition. You could take something called the Plastic Challenge. This is basically where we encourage people, just like you're probably all doing, but to think about using less single-use plastic. And we've got some really helpful advice and communities online who can help you to on this journey. Take part in citizen science. So there's all kinds of different things you can do there. If you're interested in seafood and you want to make more sustainable choices, we've got an app called the Good Fish Guide. And we've also got, in England at the moment, we've got an important action to talk to your MP about bottom trawling within marine protected areas. Not something I've had time to go into right now, but just so you're aware of other things. Okay, so that was the end of my presentation, and I would, happily try and answer any of the questions you might have.
Well, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. That was really good. Thank you so much. It was really very insightful. Lots of really, really fascinating stuff, and lots of sort of stats and numbers and stuff in there. And obviously, if you didn't, if people missed any of the sort of numbers and things and stuff, that's one of the reasons why we record these, because you can always go back to the recording to kind of check out, if you ever try and lose one of these stats, it's really worth kind of going back to, and it's really fascinating to some of the some of the stats that come out of this, and really so thank you so much for that. And but I want it's great. There's loads of people talking in the chat, which is really great. So brilliant that it's kind of caused so much discussion on it. But I think if we can kind of go to questions, and I think the first question was from Polonium about what can we safely do with our existing plastics, including plastic-based clothing. And I think you kind of touched on a bit on that, haven't you, about ensuring that we just keep our clothing for longer, and we don't, we're not asking people to throw it away, just because it's plastic now doesn't mean that we should just dispose of it.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this. I think when we're talking about sustainability, this is partly about being frugal, reusing things. Obviously, you don't need to use your clothes until they're full of holes, but if you're tired of them, then maybe it's a chance to swap them with friends. I mean, I just think this is maybe a good opportunity to remind ourselves that our, you know, our parents, our grandparents' generations just didn't expect to have such freely available fashion, for example. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't suggest that people chuck away things that are perfectly functional. But maybe just if and when you're buying new items, this is where it's a good opportunity to look at the label and think about natural fibres if you can.
Yeah, that's definitely good. I mean, I know I haven't bought any new clothes for I don't even know how long. So I've kind of made that pledge myself, and it's great, you know, and it's really it just makes you feel good knowing that you're not buying anything new. But
Definitely.
yeah,
I think
Rachel said,
sorry,
what's that? Sorry?
that climate change statistic I mentioned is really shocking, that fashion contributes 10% to global carbon emissions. I don't think many people are aware of that. You know, fashion, we don't really think of it as a big polluter, but in fact it is for lots of reasons.
Absolutely, yeah. And Rachel made a good point about don't plankton also contain the young of some animals that will eventually become large?
Yeah, definitely. So when I said plankton, I mean, plankton's really just like a catch-all phrase for all very small animals who live in the sea. So yeah, absolutely. A lot of the marine life that we think of and see, the larger things, will have started out life as plankton. So yeah, I mean, the plankton make the world go round. So plankton can be animals or plants, and plant plankton, so they're called phytoplankton, they give us a lot of the air that we breathe. So actually 70% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the sea, and a lot of that is from plankton. So yeah, I can't rave about plankton enough. They do a lot for us.
Yeah, and Polonium made a point that many animals eat plankton, so they are technically eating plastic indirectly as well. So that's really important to know as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's something we call bioaccumulation. So the idea that small stuff gets eaten and any of the plastic inside its digestive tract will therefore get eaten as well. So the big problem we get is that top predators, especially if you're thinking things like killer whales, unfortunately their diet will have contained quite a lot of plastic, because all the way down the food chain, you've got plastic. And tragically, you've also got all the chemicals that come with that plastic. So we've got some really, really sad stories there. I've just seen a question that I would like to just answer, because I think it's an important one, just about what to do with the plastic that's collected in the filters, because it's a really important point. Unfortunately, at the moment, the only thing we can do is to put it in our bins, put it in landfill. I know, we all know that that is not great, but landfill should at least mean the site should be well enough managed to stop that from blowing off into the environment. We want better solutions in future. We really want to see those fibres being repurposed and reused in a sort of circular economy, but for the time being, that just isn't possible. So that's really our only option at the moment. But what we can do is stop it going into the sea or being put on our farmland.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There was a question from S saying, do you mean fitted in the machine during the manufacturing process? These is that what you, yeah, that's what you mean,
Yeah,
isn't
I
it?
do. Sorry if I didn't make that
The
clear.
filters.
Yeah, so the one we watched the wee video of, that's basically, yeah, it has to be done in the manufacturing process. That's not something that we can just buy off the shelf.
Yeah, because I think Polonium said, I'm guessing we can buy and fit them ourselves, maybe not. So
unfortunately not. They would probably cost too much to the individual as well, which again is why we really want legal change. You know, we want the governments to bring this in so that it just becomes a matter of course, and it's something that we don't even have to think about, because unfortunately not everyone is as eco-conscious as we all are.
yeah, definitely, it's going to make a huge difference, isn't it? Jenny said, do fabric softeners contain plastic?
Oh, good question. I don't think the fabric softeners themselves do, but yeah, sorry, that's actually not something I know specifically, but I think the answer is no. Yeah, I don't think they do.
Yeah, Polonium said using liquid instead of washing powder is counterproductive in some ways.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, and it's something that I thought immediately. So maybe what you're thinking of is when we're buying a washing liquid, it obviously comes in a plastic bottle. So obviously we're kind of inadvertently having to use a single-use plastic. But I also saw somewhere in the chat, someone was talking about their, so yeah, you can make your own. You can also get refills. So certainly when we're all allowed out and about a bit more, then hopefully you all know about your local plastic-free shops. In various corners of the country, we're seeing them popping up everywhere. So the best option here would be to be refilling your plastic bottles, if that's what you meant.
Absolutely, yeah. And in Chesterfield, we have the wonderful Steph. Steph, I think she said she was on the call.
Yeah, I can just share a comment about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Steph's sustainable stuff. Yeah, she's the Chesterfield's first zero waste shop, and she's amazing. And she even does deliveries to your door as well. And that's what I've been having all of like during lockdown last year. Like, she's amazing. Just coming to my door and finding the refills is just incredible. And definitely recommend anyone to do that. Yeah. Yeah, so something about also they clog the machine up quicker, causing more chemicals to be needed and machines wearing out faster.
Yeah, so I guess that's just another benefit, a sort of side benefit of capturing the fibres.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, Liz said, can we just say a huge thank you to Tara? She's answered so many of my questions in that presentation and given me resources to use going forwards. So that's really great.
Much, genuinely. I felt this is not my normal kind of topic. As I say, I'm a biologist by training, so I did have to do a bit of research myself to make sure I was able to answer your questions. But it's been really great to meet you all, actually, and it's been a good opportunity to make sure I fully understand all of these issues.
Yeah, definitely. Some people have put about clothes swap parties. I remember sort of like that was quite a thing. Like I know a couple of back, maybe even 5 years ago or something. It was sort of like they were the thing. I mean, it's sort of kind of gone out of fashion a bit. I haven't seen them, and I think yeah, someone was saying there was a place in Sheffield where you can do clothes swaps, which is really cool. But I think we definitely need to see more of that. I guess with COVID, it's just been difficult, hasn't it? But hopefully we can kind of start to bring that back again and have the clothes swap and clothes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you've answered what should we do with plastic capsules in the guppy bag. Yeah, you've answered that one, haven't you? Yeah. And then sort of Plody mentioned about plastic hormone disruptors, cancer and other health issues. That's really really useful as well. And got a question about, has any study been done on waste from cruise ships? That would be quite interesting as well, wouldn't it, that one?
Yeah, I'm not aware. I'm sure that it has been studied, but I'm afraid it's not something I'm specifically aware of. I mean, undoubtedly they will be contributing to this problem, unfortunately, alongside so many other industries. But yeah, I'm afraid I don't know specifically.
Because I'm assuming they'll be washing clothes on the cruise ships, and then that's then discharged straight into the sea, then, isn't it? Yeah. That's direct straight into the sea. Yeah. So yeah, lots of really great comments on the chat. Lots of people are talking about like they're making their own soap and shampoo and conditioner bars and everything. So yeah, it's a really that's kind of what the future. Yeah, a lot of people are kind of starting to experiment to do these things now, making your own. And maybe I'd love to be able to sort of host, like in the future, but to maybe host a webinar, like an actual workshop or something about how to make your own washing powder and how to make all these kind of things. I think that's really really useful, because there's loads of people just saying they're making their own soap. So maybe I think we need to run a how to make your own soap course. I think it's a really interesting thing. So does anyone else have any questions? Does anyone want to kind of come in and speak and come onto a microphone, or put their hand up, or if you want to type hat in the chat box? Leanne, do you want to just come in?
Tara, hi. That was a really good presentation. One of the thoughts I had was the fibres from the fishing industry ropes, whether that would have any effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to when I presented the results of our Great British Beach Clean, so we're talking about ropes and string are one of the top 5 litter items that we're finding on beaches.
Yeah, I run a beach care team in Lincolnshire, that's why I asked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it varies depending on where you are around the coast, but we do. There's certainly the fishing industry, aquaculture industry are definitely contributing to these pollution problems. It's quite hard. People often ask, well, what's the worst contributor? But it's quite hard to say. So for our beach cleans, we can look at the proportion of litter that originates from fishing. So we know about 15% does, but that'll vary around the world. And the water, like I was saying, when we saw the photo of the North Pacific garbage patch, well, that's some of that's fishing litter, but there's other stuff in there as well. It's quite hard to tell. It's quite a mixed picture, but really I think we need to see industries across the board thinking about reducing how much plastic they're contributing.
I really agree with you on that one. Thanks.
Definitely. Yeah, and there was a question about, do all clothes have some amount of plastic in, or if not, how do we tell the difference?
That's a really good question. They don't necessarily. So yeah, for example, you can buy 100% cotton items, but interestingly, I was looking at an item of my clothing earlier, and it's 100% cotton, but of course the label is a plastic label. So, you can't necessarily always get away from it. But yeah, generally, you should be able to tell. It will tell you what proportion of the material is plastic and what plastic is in there. So yeah, you should be able to work it out.
And Rachel said, other than cotton, what other fibres are natural for checking labels?
So yeah, a few people have suggested a few things here. Obviously, we're talking wool, bamboo, linen. So quite a few different types of materials that you could look for. Yeah, depending on your choices, some of those might not be popular, but there are certainly options, and I think they're becoming a bit more available as well as the fashion industry are kind of waking up to some of these issues.
Is that an issue in terms of because I think Laura said that these kind of alternative options cost more, but you buy less. But is that an issue in terms of for people who can't afford to, who maybe can only sort of say, oh well, they do all their clothes shopping at Primark or something, and they can only afford the basic clothes and things, and that's an issue in terms of.
Yeah, and it certainly wouldn't be for me to judge. If people can't afford to make the choice, then obviously you need to use what you can. But I suppose as a general rule, it shouldn't always cost more. Unfortunately, some things when some things are branded as eco or sustainable, they sometimes are able to kind of whack a higher price tag on. But that shouldn't always be the case. These materials have been around for far longer than plastic, and they do tend to last for longer as well. So it might cost more at the outset, but hopefully it'll last for longer, so you won't have to buy again so frequently. It's a more complicated picture than obviously we would like, because it does make it hard for people. It can be prohibitively expensive, and I wouldn't want anyone to feel as if they need to make bad environmental choices because they can't afford not to. Ultimately, that's a decision we all need to make.
Yeah, there's lots of really good comments on the chat. People are talking about signing up for a beach clean. People are talking about going to get a guppy bag, which is really great. And there was, someone says, Ruth has said, I switched to Earth Breeze laundry sheets in the hope that it just dissolves without releasing plastics. They come in cardboard envelopes instead of plastic bottles, but they come from China. So.
Yeah, swings and roundabouts. It can be really hard to balance all of these different considerations.
Yeah. S, you said, could you please repeat that last bit again? Did you want to ask?
I think that was just about plastic.
Yeah.
And the answer is no, not everything does. And you should be able to find the answer on the label.
Yeah, that's interesting. Chantel says, really interesting to point on plastics on the sea floor. There are also lots of river sediment with paddlers removing lots of plastic pollution from our rivers. I paddle with the canoe club. So yeah, that's interesting as well. And I think it's something that I think Surfers Against Sewage were talking about working together with the British Canoeing to kind of work with them to try and, because I think it's, people in the canoes can help us as well to try and help clean up our rivers. There's loads of comments. So there's loads of comments on the chat now. Let's have a look. No, there's look at Etsy for makers. I think that's another good point. Hilary wants to ask a question, perhaps. Hilary, yes.
Is it? Do you get less fibres shed if you've got a combination of cotton and a synthetic than if you've got 100% synthetic?
In theory, yes. It's often a bit more complicated than that. It depends on the exact combination and also the composition of that item. But in theory, it should be less. And obviously, but it's worth pointing out, natural fibres do also shed shared fibres. It's just that obviously they're not plastic. So it's not necessarily quite so simple.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone else have any other questions, or do you want to write in the chat or come in if you want to put your hand up, or if you want to type the word hat in the chat box or anything like that? Because we've probably got about 5 more minutes if you want to, if anyone wants to come in with a question or come in with anything. Yeah, Polonium, do you want to come in?
I just wondered if we could, I know Steph does an amazing job with her shop, and I need to get more involved and talk to Steph more, but I wonder if we could have like because we're so kind of isolated at the minute, I wonder if it would be worth having like an online store or a forum where we can like swap ideas and resources. I know there's stuff on Facebook, but I don't know, like something like a bit more interactive and maybe where we could like this talk's great today. I've really enjoyed it. I wonder whether we could do something like this quite on a regular-ish basis. Not like every week or anything, but just like, because it's really good for awareness raising. Absolutely,
yeah, and it's why we record these webinars, so that we can share it around, and it's, you know, it's always there on YouTube if people want to go and have a look at. But I think it's yeah, I think it's really important. But we can definitely chat about any other ideas that you have. I'm more than happy to have a chat with you about that. So that's fine. And yeah, I think the more awareness, the better. Really, I totally agree. And we just need to kind of get out there. And I think awareness is so important. And obviously, like, you know, during COVID, we've had to restrict ourselves to doing these webinars and things because we haven't been able to kind of get out and about. But I think once COVID restrictions start to ease a bit, I'd like to be able to do more physical kind of community engagement and, you know, go and talk to people on the market and, you know, show people some graphics and things and some of the stats and kind of talk to people face to face again. I think we've all missed a lot of that. So hopefully, you know, it'll be, you know, there's a lot of awareness that we can raise, and, you know, people who just don't know these kind of things, you know, who are just kind of going out to the market to kind of do some shopping or something like that. I think, you know, if we can look to have like some kind of market stall, or I know we talked in the past about having like an empty shop unit at in the pavements, for example, or whatever, where people can just come in and find out some more information. And yeah, on all of this, it's really, really important. So we do in Chesterfield, we do have a use of a shop in the pavement centre at the minute, and there's the potential for us to be able to put resources in there for people to come and have a look at and read and that kind of thing. So that's really interesting. I'm going to paste. Oh, hang on. I'm going to paste the link to the petition again in the chat. But yeah, I think if Tara will send me her presentation, then, and any links that are in the presentation, we can get that sent round to you. So everyone who signed up for this, we'll put it on here, and I'll put it on to, yeah, we'll kind of upload it, and anyone who wants it, anyone who watches YouTube and wants the presentation can always get in touch with Plastic Free Chesterfield, and you know, we'll always be able to share it if anyone wants to have a look at it. But I'd like to at least write an article on our website with some of these recommendations and some of these things that people can do. I think that'd be really good. Adriana said, as said before, there's some hard balancing to be done. One would buy and use recycled plastic clothing, not realizing of microplastics leaking back from it. Yeah, because that's the thing, isn't it? Because, well, I mean, because everyone, if you look for something that says recycled or something, you know, when you're buying clothing, if you look for recycled clothing, it's still gonna, even if it's recycled, it's still gonna contain the fibres.
But remember, I did say most of the fibres are shed in the first few washes. So, you know, I don't want anyone to sort of, sometimes you feel like you can tie yourself in knots by trying to make the right decision and balance all these things, but secondhand is still always going to be better.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll get this recording up over the next day, and I think Tara will probably send me a presentation tomorrow, and I'll I'll try my best to try and get it out there as soon as possible. I do work for a full-time job, so I'll try my best tomorrow at some point to see if I can kind of get that done, and if I can get it sent to you tomorrow, that'd be great. And definitely, yeah, if everyone can forward the petition to over all of their networks and any groups that they're part of, and things to kind of get the word out. I'm guessing, my kind of question was about, like, the dates on the petition about by these filters by 2023 and by 2024. I'm assuming you've chosen those dates just because of how long things take to kind of go through Parliament.
Yeah, and it sort of sounds like it's still quite far in the future, but actually the UK will be, leading the way in this respect. The only other legislation like this is in France, and that is due to come in 2025. So it's, yeah, these things just take time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm always very jealous of Scotland, actually, because for them introducing the deposit return scheme, and we've been waiting in England for that for years, and it's just like we're just desperate for it to happen. And I think the Environment Bill will be, as part of the Environment Bill, that will be as part of the Environment Bill, but the Environment Bill has now been delayed again, and it's just like, oh, come on, we just want this to happen as soon as possible. Why do you keep delaying this really important bill through Parliament? And so it's so difficult sometimes, just trying to get a bill through Parliament is really difficult. And we did hold a webinar last year on the Environment Bill, and obviously the Environment Bill will be a key piece of legislation moving forwards, and there is still time to influence the Environment Bill as well, moving forwards as well, because the Environment Bill is still at an early stage that we still have an opportunity to influence it. And I think Derbyshire Climate Coalition are going to be organising a webinar, I think on the 31st of March or something, or 30th of March, all about the Environment Bill, where we'll be hearing from Friends of the Earth all about the different aspects of the Environment Bill. So I can send the link around to that as well once we've got that as well. Cheryl says, is there a campaign we can sign up at a deposit scheme in England? I'm not sure if there is a kind of petition or anything.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in Scotland.
Yeah, I don't think there is. We'll kind of keep you updated. If you can stay on our mailing list, we'll kind of keep you up to date with whatever, how that's going and what you can do. The biggest thing you can do is just write to your MP saying that you support a deposit return scheme, and that's, and hopefully the more kind of we can kind of get that out there, the better, really. Because it was a big thing in the past, and we need to bring it back. But I think I'm going to wrap everything up now. But hopefully, if anyone's got any more questions, then I don't know, Tara, if you're happy to leave your email for people to kind of email you moving forwards. And
yeah, by all means. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll send, once we can send around this the recording and the presentation, we can send Tara's email around as well. So if you have any questions, then I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. But it's been really great to see lots of, Tara, you've really generated a really good discussion tonight. There's lots of really great comments, and there's lots we can do. And we're not all perfect. I think that's the point, is that we might be kind of strongly trying to reduce our own single-use plastic, but none of us are perfect. None of us, we didn't. There's always learning that we can do. And that's what's so good about it, that we can learn so much all the time, really. And that's what I love about these webinars. I learn something new all the time. So thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. And it's really great to have you. So thank you so much for being here with us. Thanks a lot.